The battle for 5G is now a real war. It's the United States versus China, and round one takes place in federal court. Now, on Thursday, federal prosecutors in New York announced an expansion of the U.S.'s indictment of China's leading telecommunications firm, Huawei. Now, this indictment comes just a few weeks, of course, after Brexit and the U.K.'s decision to go ahead and let Huawei sell some communications equipment to limited parts of the British network. Now, the European Union is happy, but the U.S. is miffed. So are American consumers ready for their country to become a technological island unto itself? Scott Fulton is here to break this all down for us, Scott. And as we understand, of course, a lot of this information is coming in on this as we speak.
Yeah, I literally had a game plan for what I wanted to say to you today, Karen. And that literally changed within the last 45 minutes as federal court in New York, federal district court, handed down an expansion of its existing indictment into Huawei. Now, folks who have been regular readers of ZDNet will be familiar with my map motif and kind of what that pertains to. And my most recent story, which talked about the 5G battle effectively being in the United States court. And I had this speech already to make as to whether the United States was going to sit on its hands. Well, the answer to that is effectively no. It's expanding its ongoing legal battle against Huawei. And the expansion is, I've read through most of it. Like I say, it's only happened 45 minutes ago. The basis of the expansion is that the United States is now alleging that Huawei, since in one operation started in 2009, another that started in 2013, have been actively conspiring to steal intellectual property from United States firms. There aren't too many of those firms. So if I said Cisco and Intel, that's probably going to be one or both of them are going to be on that list. And it would appear that the federal grand jury may have maintained that there may be enough evidence, or they're going to see whether there is enough evidence to go through with this. The idea being that that Huawei took every opportunity it could to incite its own employees to come away with some interesting pieces of American intellectual property, including some that's related to 5G transmission. And in that indictment, as a for instance, and this is peculiarly interesting, but one of the for instances there is that Huawei actually had an employee who was at a trade show, a telecommunications trade show, and that they were wearing a badge saying that they were from a company called Huawei, which it's phonetically backwards, and that they sneaked into the booth of this company and took a picture they sneaked the cover off of the router and took photographs of the printed circuit boards. Well, that would be interesting, and it also fits under the sort of category of you got to be kidding me, because there was a time when that sort of thing took place all the time. Where if you want to make a federal indictment of it, you're going to have to indict just about everybody in this business at one time or another since 1980. But the idea here, the strategy appears to be changing. The United States appears to be shifting off of its notion that trying to get hackers to break into the 5G network to conduct surveillance. As you may recall from last week's story, Secretary of State Pompeo was saying, it's not so much about that. And now we know what he means by that. They are going to try to throw some intellectual property into the mix to try to show that that the country of China had an interest in inciting Huawei to incite its employees to find lots of interesting ways to steal intellectual property from American companies for use with 5G. Now, here's the interesting part. What they would have to have done with that technology is share it in turn with other 5G participants in the world for the global 5G standard. So when they put their standards forward, you would think that somebody out there would have said, you know, that looks familiar. Didn't we put that in a trade show about 4 or 5 years ago? But it'll be interesting to see where this goes, and also whether these American companies are happy letting the United States government handle its intellectual property suits on their behalf.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. You know, and there's so many balls in the air here with this. It's a very complicated thing that the average consumer probably doesn't really understand. But what does the indictment actually mean for consumers? You know, how will they or will they feel the impact of the U.S. government's actions, especially if they're not the ones that are actually buying Huawei phones?
Yeah, and you'd be hard pressed to find on a common retail store shelf a Huawei branded phone. Some folks will go out of their way to get an unlocked Huawei phone and probably make it work here in this country. But Huawei phones are not really part of the American market. So what does this mean in the end? Well, Huawei is one of the major companies behind the transmission technology, the router technology that the forthcoming smaller, cheaper, more power efficient style of 5G telecommunications routers. Huawei is one of the leading companies behind that. There are really only 3 major players in that market, as I've mentioned before, Huawei being the #1 player, and then passing back and forth number 2 and number 3 are Nokia and Ericsson, which is over here in Scandinavia, which I've got my rocket on top of right there. And the thing about that is when the United States sides against China and Huawei jointly on this, it's putting a kind of a favoritism toward sort of a regulated duopoly, because these 2 companies are the only one that's essentially left. And because they have their own agenda, Ericsson and Nokia, they do partner in some respects. And it's important that they are continuing to build 5G according to the globally dictated plan. But if Huawei were to break from that, if Huawei were to at some point here fairly soon say, you know what, there's no good reason for us to share in the telecommunications process if all that's going to happen is that America is going to act on you guys' behalf and sue us for intellectual property violations, there will actually be a complete split in the global standards. And that affects consumers as far as to when they're going to see the big speed improvement that everybody's been touting for their phones. You know, there's supposed to be a life-changing improvement. For folks in those metropolitan areas where the first 5G services are being turned on, they're seeing maybe 20% speed gains, which are nice, but they're not life-changing experiences. Now, they could become that if these cities go on with their plan to restructure the telecommunications networks. And we're only at the first stage of that. But that's going to come, if not to a screeching halt, then to a pretty gummy slowdown. If Huawei starts to back out of the picture, it starts to cooperate with its own interests. It deals with China, basically, but also mostly Southeast Asia, parts of Europe, which are allowing Huawei. The European Union is happy to allow Huawei, or at least happy to allow member nations to allow Huawei in. And certainly Russia and its interest. India is right on board with Huawei right now, because Huawei is really helping India leap all the way from 2 and 3G over to 5G. What this will mean is that you're going to start to see like 2 different styles of phones, 2 different styles of home receiving equipment. You'll start to see a split in the way that technology is developed. It'll be slower, and because of that, it'll be more expensive, because you're not marketing to the entire world anymore. You're marketing to a piece of it. Anybody who's going to want to stay in this business, besides Huawei, will have to develop two styles of equipment for the different parts of the world in which they want to have a market, unless they want to restrict their market to half the world or their own respective hemispheres. And that's going to keep costs high, relatively high, and that's going to be something consumers will feel in the end, in their phone bills, in their cable bills, or whatever should replace their cable TV bills, and in what their telephones will eventually cost.
Yeah, and Scott, it kind of seems that maybe the everyday consumer should start lowering their expectations, if you will, about what 5G technology, their phone services, what they'll actually become. Maybe if we kind of bring it down a little bit about what we expect, then it might be a good time for that. What do you think?
Well, it's fair to say that telcos haven't exactly defined their terms here. They haven't stepped out on a limb and said, "Well, we change your life. Here's the extent to which we'll do that." On a consumer level, on a business level, they've been saying, "Hey, we've been talking about having remote medicine, surgeons who operate machinery remotely, dictating or actually operating machines that operate on a patient in the field thousands of miles away in real time." Yes, that would be a life-changing thing. So there are lots of business applications. For the consumer who's interested in 4K movies or something like that, I think it's reasonable to say that consumers are actually fairly happy with the state of technology the way that it is right now, in terms of bandwidth, um, overall speed, their capability to dial up the entertainment they want, the communications capability of things like we're doing right now, conferencing like this. It's reasonably fast and reasonably acceptable. We could hang on to this for a couple of years, maybe, if we had to, and we may have to before the players in global technology start to get geopolitics out of the way, so they can start talking to each other about the standards and techniques again.
All right. Well, and Scott, before we wrap up, and I know it seems kind of weird even to go here, but what is your honest opinion, thoughts on, will there ever really be a 6G at this point?
Predictions are things I don't really do until it becomes absolutely necessary. Global 6G today, right now, as of this indictment, is off. It's not going to happen. You're going to see things that will eventually be 6G, unless 5G is milked for all it's worth in the public eye. Unless people's expectations are raised so high as to what that you're going to start seeing holograms in your living room. If people's expectations are raised so high that they end up being disappointed by the whole G thing, then the world's telecommunications operators, not the transmitter manufacturers, but the telcos, the AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile in the States, Vodafone in the UK, Orange in France, they're going to start to step back and say, this 5G thing burned us in the past. So maybe we need to stop calling things G for a while and just start migrating to new platforms incrementally on our own terms at our own speed. If they decide to do that, then that's going to make things a lot harder for the vendors, their suppliers, to build their networks each individually on their own terms. And you're going to start seeing, as my mouse, and I need to turn my machine back on. Yeah, my map is back, and now I'm back. You're going to start seeing if the telcos pull back, that's going to make things difficult for the vendors, and that's going to make things more expensive yet again for simply transmitting a call like we're doing now. Globalization keeps costs low. Everything that works against globalization keeps costs high.
Yeah, well, it's definitely, Scott, one of these issues that's got so many moving parts, and it's something I know that you follow very closely, though, and have been really keeping us up on. So we certainly appreciate that, and we'll have much more for you on ZDNet, and you can check out Scott's latest article there and more on the indictment on ZDNet as well. Thanks for watching, everybody.